Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. I hope you enjoy.
And now with technical interviews, we have ChatGPT. I was just using it today. I was using ChatGPT today because, Python syntax and me, I'm doing some open source work with Basil and contributing an example and a tutorial. I was like, how do I give me an example of a Flask Python server that generates that has a separate Python file that generates a random number, write the unit tests for me. Did all that.
Really? Wow. I haven't messed around with it too much.
So think about interviews now. You're going to have somebody remote, possibly, pull open ChatGPT, and they're just going to start spewing answers from that. You're going to be coding with them. They're going to go on ChatGPT and say, hey, how to do this.
Yeah.
And then they're going to retype it in your window line by line.
Sure.
So yeah, it's taking tech, and we were going to talk about this later, but I'm going to go on my rant now.
Sure.
I don't feel that live coding interviews are worth a nickel. They're actually worth minus money because they'll scare good applicants away from your company, in my opinion. So any interview process is stressful.
Sure.
It's just even with me, I'm very concerned about what's going on. I've been doing this a long time. Admittedly, I'm not interviewing for full-time jobs, but whenever I'm on an initial sales call, it's an interview. The client's either going to accept us as a company or not by myself or another principal architect that's on the phone call. They have to like us. So I'm kind of used to interviewing, but again, it's intimidating enough. When was the last time that you had 4 people look over your shoulder while you were writing a for loop?
Yeah.
Have you ever had that?
Yeah, no.
That's not your job as an engineer.
Yeah.
Right? And not only that, engineers are very creative types. A lot of good engineers are incredibly creative types. I know so many bad musicians that became software engineers, it's not even funny.
Yeah.
Right? And that's because engineering is, interestingly enough, especially software engineering, is a very creative activity. You can write a function 6 ways sideways, meaning you can write it this way, you can write it that way, you can write it another way, you can write it another way, and they all work. So you're not only taking a person that isn't expected to work under pressure situation, but now you're taking an artistic personality who isn't expected to work under pressure. Now, admittedly, you have a production outage. You're working under a bit of pressure. You might have a person looking over your shoulder, but that's a different type of pressure because you're not with new people. Social anxiety is a big thing nowadays, right? And a lot of people have real issues with social anxiety. We won't go into why, and if you do, I hope you're getting some help because it's definitely it's definitely treatable. But often I see that within technical staff. Often technical staff have poor people skills. Often technical staff at times are on the verge of autism or have autism, and you put folks like that under undue strain, you're going to miss some real gems.
Sure.
And it depends on the role that you're hiring for as well, right? And it might be with, for example, I'll use Google. They have a thing called being googly. You've got to have very good communication skills, very good interaction skills, very good soft skills to work at Google. It's, unless you're like the father of the Linux kernel, of these 5 modules, and then they know that you're not going to interact with folks, but you've got to be Googly. And many people get passed over because of that. But that's the culture of that company. Depending on the culture of that company, you may lose really good individuals. And frankly, I never remember the syntax of for loop, and I've been programming them for years.
Sure.
Half the time I got to go to Stack Overflow and figure out, okay, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And to me, it's not about knowing the details. And Einstein said, if it's in a book, why am I going to memorize it? Nowadays, if it's on Google or on Stack Overflow or on XYZ, why am I going to memorize that? That's filling my brain with clutter I don't need personally. So let's get engineers that know how to ask the right questions, know how to maybe interact with business to figure out, no, this is actually what business needs. Are creative, can create, in terms of front end, like they can take the designer's UX and you have, you're, what do you call it? What does an artist have? Examples of your work. I know there's
portfolio.
There we go. So you have your portfolio. I'd say if you're in front end, your portfolio is far more important than if you understand this CSS framework. Everybody can learn that. You should have people that should be able to pass on that knowledge to them. Even though you say you're a React shop, you've got so much knowledge internally that they're going to have to learn either through reading documentation or working with other people. They're going to have a ramp up period, right? So why are you expecting them to know your CSS library? Other thing, recruiters, I love it. Read the other day, I was just walking through, sometimes I just look through job postings because sometimes those folks are also going to need our help. They were looking for a FinOps person with 8 to 10 years of experience. FinOps hasn't been around for 8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and often there's a disjointing between the recruiter, the job rec that's written, and then what happens during the interview. So, yeah, I just don't like live coding. And also, you're giving them homework. Like, we're going to give you a take home for overnight. Really? How are you compensating them for that?
Yeah.
Like deadpan. Like, you're expecting a person to do work for your company so that you can screen them better. That's fine. Compensate them. Give them a $200 Amazon gift certificate. You don't have to pay. You don't have to put them on their payroll. You can just say, hey, you've gotten to this point. We're going to give you a gift certificate because we're going to ask you to, do an hour's worth of work. Is that fair? And allow them to say no. Yeah. They don't want to do that. If they don't want to take their private time, because if they're currently employed, they've got to do it either at night or on the weekend. Don't expect them to take their time for you as an employer. Now, I never ask for people to do work after hours that, because I need to screen them better. That's just, it was part of the past. It's, how do we judge software engineers? Well, it's tough. It's hard interviewing people. It's hard interviewing technical people, especially since their bosses may not be as technical as them. It's difficult to hire good people, but I would say asking people to do work off hours, this is wrong in a lot of different ways. It's disrespectful. Yeah. So at Home Chef, where I work now, we've compensated folks, I think primarily at the senior and lead level, at pretty decent hourly wage that we pay them up until whatever it is, $600 is, I think, when you have to fill out a W-4, right? I-9. But it's really interesting. My last job search, when I went through and company said, oh, here's a take home, I would always ask, do you have a live coding interview option? Because I do this podcast and I've spent a lot of time doing interview prep. I would rather take 30 to 45 minutes and just, okay, let's figure it out. Either I'm going to be a fit, I'm going to pass, or I'm not. And then we know. Or, if they won't do that, then they're going to send me something where, like, you say it should take 1 to 2 hours, but I know if I really want to make it good, it's going to be 4 hours. Then all of a sudden, like that,
that's not even really one night. That's probably 2 different nights I got to work on.
8 hours later.
Yeah.
And I'm not the fastest worker. I do really good work. And I shouldn't say that. Sometimes some of the things I can do really fast, but a lot of the times when I'm like debugging something or trying to figure out something or make it really clean, I take a lot of time working on it to get it looking really good. Also, why are you doing like 16 hours worth of interviews? I've heard horror stories out of some of the big tech where it's just like 4 or 5 interviews. Like, are you compensating these people for the 6 hours that you're taking with them when your placement rate is 20%?
Yeah.
Or 10% or 5%? How you're asking these people to jump through so many hoops, talk to so many different people for an hour or 2 at times. You're flying them in at times to meet face to face. I see the validity of that, but hey, give them, a card to go eat dinner, not only pay dinner, but, have somebody take them out or send them to a sporting event or do something, know. And it's like you said, it's a very tough problem. Hiring technical people is very difficult. Getting good staff is hard. So, we just have to be conscious and empathetic of the people that we're interviewing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not Google, you should really consider if you're interviewing like Google, right? People might be willing to jump through those hoops if you're going to be paid in the top whatever percentile. But if you're just I don't want to say random company. If you're not a brand name company everybody knows, you might need to adjust your standards, right? Maybe not even your standards for engineers, but your interview process to find them. Because while I might wait 3 months to figure out if Google's yay or nay, I'm probably not going to wait 3 months for so-and-so.com to tell me if I'm good enough to work there, right?
So, and as a college dropout, I could, what is it, like 2 years ago? The big tech started accepting people that didn't have degrees.
Yeah.
Like, why are we forcing a degree? And I won't even get on rant on how I believe that university system is failing teaching software engineering correctly. They're working on it, thank gosh, but there's very few colleges that, they come out not knowing Git.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I use Git today, and I'm not your average engineer, but if you're an engineer, I've taught so many engineers that are medium level how to rebase properly. And it's just, it's something we use. It's one of our tools that we use almost every day, unless you're in a perf shop. So, it's interesting problems. And I like Google as an organization, worked there for 1.5 years as a contractor, but their hiring process takes too long, in my opinion. Nowadays, you have to be fast with your hiring process. People will move quickly. Even with the layoffs that we have right now, you still have to be fast with the right people. The right people that you're going to get at the price point you want, with the tech skill you want, you're going to miss out unless your hiring process is speedy. And often it's like delays in communication and follow-up and, scheduling these calls, and then they have to reschedule the calls and out. And that's what takes so long, but still, don't take 2 months to hire somebody. Not today. Take 2 weeks. Take 2 weeks. Don't mess around.
Yeah. I've seen I used to do a lot of negotiation coaching for folks who were going to work for FANG companies. I've seen up to 6 months at several FANG companies where it literally took 6 months from the time when they said, okay, we're going to make you an offer, for them to actually, sign and take that offer. Not because the candidate wanted the extra time, because it's just how long it took to get through it, which is absolutely wild.
Yeah. And that's something I'll talk, about as well, as negotiation is really important. A lot of folks just don't know how to negotiate well in this industry. They just accept, okay, we're going to give you this range. And thank goodness some states have it where employers have to tell them the price range, right? And thank goodness, as an employer, maybe not great, but is what it is. But that range doesn't mean anything.
Sure.
If you're the right candidate, ask for, 20, 30 grand above the range.
Yeah.
Get yourself in a position and talk to them about also the path of how you're going to progress. When are they going to look at increasing your wage? What does the review process look like? Right? Talk about that with them so that you have the right expectations going in. If they're not going to look at you for a year for a wage increase, or 2 years even, then you might want to negotiate for a bit more money initially.
Yeah.
Of course, there's hiring bonuses and full-time work. There's other options, different bonuses as well. And just be open with candidates about that. Say, look, this is what happens. You're going to be at the upper range. You're going to have to go to a staff 3 engineer instead of staff 2, and that progression is usually 5 years. Just be honest with candidates. The more honest with candidates you are, in my opinion, the better it's, the happier they're going to be. They're going to have regret starting with your company. It's kind of like buyer's remorse, right? They're going to have buyer's remorse and excitement, and also regret for leaving their last company. It's, going to be a bunch of emotions, but the more honest and more straightforward you can be and more empathetic you can be with them starting, the happier they're going to be. And you've had engineers that have accepted offers and they're supposed to accept in 2 weeks and they back out. And the cost of hiring is very high.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, like you said, as a recruiter, you have a budget. It takes a lot of work to get good staff. So be just completely forward with them. Talk about wages, on the first date. Talk about have the hard conversations with the folks you're talking to in the interview process up front. Talk about, okay, this is the price range we have, or ask them, right? That's the typical thing. Giving up the first number, you lose power.
Sure.
So I've read the Chris Voss books on negotiation, probably some of the best books out there. So
yeah, and for recruiters, I think it's so easy to leave things unsaid and just hope for the best, right? Like that was always my kind of pet peeve in recruiting. Was I have a lot of folks who are on my team where I go, "Oh, did you ask them this, this, and this?" And they said no, and I was like, "Well, do you think? Are you worried about that?" And they said, "Oh, not really." And I said, "Don't you think they're going to be sitting at home thinking, should I leave this job that I feel comfortable in and happy in for this other one?" Right. And they're thinking about these things. So we should ask them those things too. Right. And like you said, right, like what does a performance raise actually look like? Right. Are you going to review me in 6 months, or if I start in November? Because I'm not eligible for this year. So it's all the way, so like you said, like a year and a half or almost 2 years, like those types of things. If you say to them, yes, the candidate might go, oh no, like that might actually be a negative for them. But if you don't say it, then it's just a question mark. And it's almost worse. It probably is worse to have someone start and 2 months in, they realize that and then leave or start to look for other jobs. Then they don't start at all, because then you've invested time, you've invested money, you've onboarded them, team gets to know them a little bit, and then they're gone, versus, oh, we had this person, we thought they were coming and now they're not, right? At least then you can start the interview process right away, instead of having like basically lost a quarter plus just having someone getting ramped up, right?
Yeah, like I said, hiring staff and onboarding staff is very expensive. Takes not only time out of the manager's life, but also takes time out of the staff, all the staff around them. Slow down a bit, right? In order to bring on board, train the new person. Some companies have really gotten that down to a science, which is awesome, where you got to just really take them through it really quickly. But to your point, 2 months later, you're going to start the hiring process again.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you're doing something wrong. And often it's caused by expectations. And often it's caused by you lowballing. You've got to. I was talking with Brian Smith on my podcast the other day, and we're talking about compensation. And so I was like, "Well, what do you think in other forms of compensation?" He's like, "I don't really believe in, that people are going to stay around because they have free dog grooming."
Interesting.
It wasn't those words exactly,
Sure.
that was far more colorful for me now, but he's like, you got to pay people good.
Mm.
That's one of the main drivers that they're going to stay around for a long time. Have a good, fun work environment and pay them good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get into wage negotiation for that. And it's challenging. A lot of people that aren't in sales have a lot of difficulty with negotiation.
Yeah. I will plug levels.fyi. I used to work there as an engineer, and that's where I did a bunch of negotiation coaching in the past. But that is, if you're just looking for data on what should I be paid or what are other people at this company making, it's very helpful. And they do have a negotiation service too. That's what I used to help people with. And I can't tell you how many times some people said, I'm happy with what they gave me, but like, why shouldn't I ask for more if I can? Right? I'm like, absolutely. Right. And then you get an extra 20, 30, $100,000. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm glad I paid $500 to have someone help me do this.
Yeah. And it's really important because that's how you grow your career, right? If you keep increasing your wage over time, you're going to move your career forward. You'll plateau out. You might have to shift your focus a bit into something else, but you want to come in at a good value level. Not only that, you're going to be treated differently. If you come in at a staff 3 engineer or QE2, whatever they call it, right? You're going to be given a different level of work. You're going to be treated differently. You're going to have a different level of responsibilities, which you may or may not enjoy. So look at where you're coming in at, but in terms of staff progression and, it's very silly to me that people aren't negotiating, and be open to it as an employer. Know it's coming, be aware of the labor laws that they're gonna, like, if somebody lives in Colorado and they're working remotely for a company that's in New Jersey or wherever that doesn't have it, where you have to say a range, that because they're in Colorado, you're technically then posting the job posting in Colorado, and you've got to just say that range. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my word on that. But I believe that's how it works. So
yeah. And
I think it's really fair getting a range, right? It simplifies the conversation and makes it a lot easier on both ends.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, if you're off by an order of magnitude, right? Like that's where I think it's the most important, right? Are we talking, we're off by $5,000, right? Okay, well, like it's probably worth still talking to them. If you're off by 50, okay, well, it's gonna be a little tougher to work this one out, right? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and that wastes the candidate's time and wastes your time. And why should I be so worried about wasting the candidate's time? They're going to badmouth you to their friends.
Yeah.
And they might come and work for you in 6 months. If you treat them fairly,
sure.
They're going to maybe in a year or 2 years' time, they're going to have the level of experience that you need, or you're going to have a new program that they're going to need. They're going to reapply. They've already gone through the process and they know what to expect. And they're not, getting turned down for a job. That's a bit crushing, right? Let's be honest. So just treat them fairly. Give them good feedback too. Give them good feedback why they didn't get the position.
Yeah.
You got to do it gracefully, and there's some legality around that as well. But just let them know, hey, this. Don't send them a letter saying, declined, and that's about it. Treat them gracefully. It's hiring, like I said, it's very stressful for all parties, very expensive for all parties. Let's just make it fun, make it interesting. Don't overkill it, and realize you're gonna have some losses. You're gonna hire some people and they just don't work out.
Sure.
And you can't, no matter what you do, no matter how many references you get, no matter how long you interview them for, no matter how good of a fit you think they are, no matter you have them talk to 13 different people, no matter you have them take home 2 weeks worth of homework, people are still going to get through the cracks that you just don't know.
Yeah.
You can't see it coming.
Well, any other tips or advice for folks who are preparing for technical interviews, or maybe they're thinking, okay, January's coming up, new job, new year, new me, right? Any advice for
Right.
folks?
Right. In terms of the other side of the table, practice. One of the ways that you can gain confidence with interviewing and with anything is do it over and over again.
Hmm.
So practice with a friend. It's easy to get. You probably could Google, Google's interview questions, right? You could Google Facebook's interview questions. You could do that and then prep for it, as well as, like I said, research who you're talking with. Know that person, read to their LinkedIn profile before you talk with them. Don't look like schmuck. I hate to say it, but you've got, a limited amount of time to make an impression. Put on something that's comfortable, something that looks good. Comb your hair, turn your video camera on. If you're in person, show up fresh, make sure it's just, you're on a date. I hate to say it, but just follow the same practices, be on time.
Sure.
And, be early, frankly. And if you have to cancel, don't cancel last minute unless your mom's dying. Sure. This, one of the tricks I used, which I just remembered, is I would have the candidate call me.
Yeah.
Not the other way around. Right? When we weren't doing video calls, I would have the candidate call me on the phone. One, I would see if they're tardy or not. Two, I would see if they would forget or not. And it just shows initiative then. Also follow up. People don't friggin' send just notes after the interview saying, thank you. Here's another copy of my resume. Here's some example in GitHub of the work I did. It was great talking about hockey with you. Looking forward to hearing back from you. Also show interest. Say, this is the type of company I'm working for. You folks are solving really interesting problems. I would like to work with you folks. So what's the next step?
Mm-hmm.
How I've had so few people do that in my lifetime, just stating, I want to work for you.
Yeah.
What are the next steps? This seems like a really cool place to work. So what are we doing next?
Yeah. I think it's huge.
Yeah. And send the follow-up email. It doesn't have to be the polished letter mailed like we did 20 years ago. Send a few lines, follow up, say, hey, great. When would you like me to follow up with you? Like you said, it's sales, man. It's sales and dating. And Taylor, it's just really making that impression and being honest. If you do, the best thing you can say in an interview is like, hey, I don't know about that. Mm-hmm. I've never used that before. I've heard really cool things about it. And then you put it back to them. You start getting them to talk about it. Start them training you on it. And because you're open to understanding and excited about learning and having them share with you, that's going to make them feel good. Like I said, it's a feel-good process, which is kind of wonky in itself since we're a bunch of, engineers that are supposed to be all logical, right?
Yeah.
It ain't about that. People get hired that relate to other people.
Totally. Yeah. I think the follow-up is so big. And like you said, so rare, right? To just send an email. And if you don't have the email, that's fine. Ask the recruiter, whoever like your point of contact is, just send them a note afterwards saying, hey, I really enjoyed talking to you. Mention one or two things. Like, I think sometimes people get worried, like, is this too much? Am I overdoing it? Or that, like you said, they're trying to make it perfect and like hyper inspecting every line. Every single person that followed up with me when I was hiring when I was a recruiter building out a sales office, like that was a big plus. Even if they're maybe I got one follow-up that was like clearly there's a ton of typos and issues with that. And maybe I probably shouldn't have interviewed that person in the first place for a sales role where they're going to be writing a lot. But other than that, I think every single one, even if I didn't really like love the person on the phone, I was like, oh, at least they followed up, right? Like, okay, check. Like you at the very least, I'm going to, if you're not a good fit, I'm going to tell you that sooner, right? Like I think it
it gives you a plus, but it also speeds things along, where instead of being in like this question mark world, okay, well, I've got something back from this person immediately. Oh, I remember them a little bit more. Okay, let me make sure I go do my next step, right? So I think the worst, or one of the worst parts about interviewing, is being in that limbo stage all the time.
Mm-hmm.
At least if you lob it back at them, you go, okay, great, I sent a thank you message. That's my next step. Now I'm waiting on you. And it's very clear. That's where the spot we're in, right?
And no 10-page resumes.
Sure.
2 pages, 2 to 3 pages. No matter how senior you are, no matter how long experience you have, 2 to 3 pages. No typos. Get it, use Grammarly, use a service to, or if you're not a writer at all and are serious about it, maybe have somebody edit your resume for you. Your resume is super important. Unless you're super senior, then I think it's a joke. Somebody asks for my resume, I'd be like, yeah, okay, excuse me, as I download a PDF of my LinkedIn. So at that end, I don't think a highly polished resume is important. I think personal connections are far more important at a higher level. But don't have a 10-page resume where you're going into detail about every single thing you did for a company and you never edit it. Nobody's going to read past 2 pages.
Yeah.
Nobody. And have a description of the type of position and type of person you are. That's 2 or 3 sentences. And then have a list of the technical stuff that you are proficient in. So that it's very easy for recruiter and also OCR to pick up, okay, these are the keywords that we're looking for, XYZ, XYZ. And if you have, this is very easy to scan a resume that's like that you have the intro, and then you have, okay, cloud skills, AWS, GCP, Azure, operating systems, Linux, programming languages, Java, C++, right? It's a table.
Yeah.
Do that. It just increases simplicity for the hiring manager, for the recruiters, make their life easy. Don't give them 10 pages that you think they're going to wade through, and they're not.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it.
I've seen a lot of 10-page resumes in my life, and I'll tell you, I've never got past the second page. I rarely get past the first page, honestly.
Yeah, as a recruiter, you don't get past the first page.
Yeah.
Right. As somebody that's a hiring manager, you'll read 2 or 3 pages, especially skip down. For some reason, the university and all that's at the bottom. I don't know why, but quasi matters now anyways, but who knows. But like I said, I'm adamant, just a couple sentences, who you are, what you want, type of position you want, then just a block, not English, not sentences. I've done this. Make a table, what databases you worked with, what languages you worked with, what cloud, what operating systems, any other things that are pertinent. Like for you, it'd be CSS libraries, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be, JavaScript libraries that are specific for, for me, it might be, okay, if I'm getting hired for Bazel, what languages have I worked with in Bazel?
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you really want a position, target the current job, what you're working on, to what they want.
Yeah.
Take that rec and make sure that you're saying in your current job that you're working on. If you don't have that, if you've gone onto something, you're switching back to it, do a summary right after all the blocks that this is the skills and how it applies to the current position, or do a cover letter of that as well. So really focus and target your jobs towards what they're looking for. It's just, like I said, make their lives easy. It's just go, like the recruiter will be like, oh yeah, she has this, and this. Perfect. All right, forward it on. If you don't tell them that and you expect the recruiter to dig it out of your resume, forget it.
Yeah. Do you have any different advice or additional advice for folks? Maybe this is their first job search or their second job search.
Mm-hmm. Have a LinkedIn profile. Network. I wish when I was 30, I understood how much I would rely on my network of people that I know.
Mm.
Follow people, interact with them on LinkedIn, interact with them on Twitter, learn from them, go to conferences. The people that you want to become, you need to associate yourself with.
Mm.
And get into that group of people, whether it's volunteering through open source, so you get to work with some really cool people that way, or it's working on your skills. For intro level engineers, to me, it's more about wanting to learn than they have the skills they have. Right? I would rather have somebody that has a burning desire to learn and do cool stuff more than somebody that understands it all. I would rather, there's many engineers that just get kind of burnt and they're there for the 9 to 5. I would much rather have an engineer that enjoys what they do, wants to, they're eager, hey, can we actually contribute this to open source? I get like 2 hours a week to work on open source, or, depending on what your company's policy is, maybe a full day to work on this side project or open source. I would rather have that engineer that at times they don't write the best code. We'll unit test the hell out of it. At times they miss timelines. They're not the 10x engineer, right? Whatever the heck that is. They can problem solve, they can troubleshoot, and they care about the code and they want to do it, right? They care about what they're doing, like in our case with their clients. They're passionate about helping out their clients. I'll take somebody that's a little rusty around the edges with Terraform. You can look that stuff up, right? Why are we so concerned about the technical capability rather than they have the earnesty to learn new stuff?
Yeah, I love that. And I used to always say, they're not hiring you, especially at early career engineers, they're not hiring you for the skills you have day one, right? They're hiring you for the skills you'll have 6 months in, a year in, right? The potential, right?
And also, if you are brand new into software, get into open source. Go find some open source. Like I know a gentleman who started I don't know how old Lucas was. He was like 15 or 16. He started contributing to Kubernetes. He's written his own ticket. He's been consistently working in the Kubernetes industry. He helped port Kubernetes to ARM initially to get it to run on Raspberry Pis. He's the reason that it runs on Raspberry Pis. He was a kid starting it. And I'm not saying you have to start as a 14-year-old coding. What I'm saying is, you're 27, you're new to coding, get onto GitHub, get a GitHub profile, start learning how to use Git, get your foot in the door with meetings. So most large open source projects have user group meetings. They'll have, like, for instance, Kubernetes has a SIG node, SIG security, SIG Windows. So those are the special interest groups that look after that block of code that, say, runs on Windows. So there's a meeting you can attend. So not only can you volunteer, but you can also meet cool people. You're meeting senior people from Red Hat or Microsoft and Google, et cetera, and you get to start, like I said, that's a way to hang out with peers that you'd like to be one day. And having open source work, if you're a software engineer, that speaks volumes to me.
Yeah.
Everything's moving towards, virtually everything's moving towards open source. And it's code that they can see. They don't even have to ask if you can write code. They can go look at a commit.
Yeah. I love it. Great, Crystal. Thank you so much. This has been really fun and I think super informative as well. Can you tell folks, you mentioned the book, we got LionKube, plug everything, please, and the podcast.
So LionKube.com is spelled with a K. So LionKube.com. I just started the FinOps on my podcast, the FinOps show. It's FinOpsShow.com. We're on all the different podcast platforms and YouTube and all that. My book you can find on Manning. It's called Core Kubernetes. So there's a bit.ly link to it /Core Kubernetes. My socials are all Chris Love CNM, as in Charlie Nancy Michael. So Chris Love CNM, GitHub and LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm best reachable on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you have any questions, you want to have coffee for 15, 30 minutes, you're new in the industry, want some advice, give me a jingle. I'm always open to having conversations like that. If you need help with Kubernetes or Bazel or FinOps or what have you, also holler and we'll see if we're a good fit.
Great. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. Really appreciate you having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for watching the technical interview portion of the Professional Technical Interviewee. If you want to tackle this interview question, you can find it at github.com/professional technical interviewee. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.